I now give the floor to Special Envoy Pedersen.
Madam President, 1 year ago, many believed that the Syrian conflict was winding down. Yet the past 12 months have seen a steady stream of violence, punctuated by escalations that continue to this day across many areas of Syria, such as the northwest, the northeast, and the south. Proscribed terrorist groups have also not been defeated and continue to pose a major security threat. All of this serves as a constant, grim reminder that the need for a comprehensive political process, as mandated by this Council in Resolution 2254, is more pressing than ever. Today, let me start by updating you on one aspect of that process, the Constitutional Committee. On the 25th November, the small body of the Syrian-led and Syrian-owned Constitutional Committee convened for its second session. Before arriving in Geneva, I had asked each co-chair to put forward proposals for an agenda for the second session in line with the terms of reference and core rules of procedures. On 21st November, the co-chair designated by the Opposition Syrian Negotiations Commission sent me a proposed work plan with 10 constitutional headings and an agenda focusing on the preamble to the Constitution and basic principles of the Constitution. On 25th November, the co-chair designated by the Syrian government proposed an agenda discussing national pillars or national pillars of concern of the Syrian people. At the same time, the co-chair designated by the government insisted that constitutional issues could not be discussed until these national pillars were discussed. For its part, the SNC co-chair stated that national pillars could be discussed provided this occurs within the context of the agreed terms of reference and core rules of procedures, or within an agenda of basic constitutional principles. From 25 through 29 November, I sought, in line with my mandate and consistent with the Syrian leadership and ownership of the process, to facilitate consensus between the co-chairs and bring their viewpoints closer together. We had serious discussions in this regard. Different formulas were put forward that might have enabled both sides to table and discuss the issues of interest to them within the scope of the Constitutional Committee's mandate. By the end of the week, however, it was clear that consensus will not be reached and that the meeting of the small body was not possible. During this recess, I remain focused on facilitating agreement on an agenda for the next session of the small body. I hope that I will soon be able to consult with the Syrian government directly in Damascus to this end, as well with the Syrian Negotiations Commission. My team also remains in contact with the Middle Third civil society delegation, and I stand ready to support them along the lines I outlined in my last briefing. I have also met with international stakeholders on this and all other aspects of the process. This past month, I met with foreign ministers of Russia and Turkey, as well as those of Italy, Jordan, Algeria, and senior officials from the US, France, Iran, and Germany, who all expressed support for my mediation efforts. I hope agreement can be reached promptly on an agenda that falls in line with the terms of reference and core rules of procedure of the Constitutional Committee. As things stand, and absent an agreed agenda, I see no reason to convene another session of the small body. Madam President, When I last briefed this Council, we had just concluded a successful opening session of the Constitutional Committee. This second session was obviously very different in both substance and tone. But disagreement on the agenda is typical for any political process. I do, however, believe there are several lessons we can draw from the experience of the second round. Let me highlight 3 experiences. First, the Constitutional Committee is and will remain fragile. Progress depends on the 2 sides whose agreement made its creation possible, the Syrian government and the Syrian Negotiations Commission, allowing their members to work professionally on the constitutional issues and without disassociating themselves from the work of those nominated. The Constitutional Committee needs to be nurtured and genuinely supported if it is to succeed. This is the responsibility of the Syrian parties. International stakeholders, too, have a supporting role to play. I know I can count on the support of this Council in that regard. Second, any proposed agenda must comply with the terms of reference and core rules of procedure agreed between the government and opposition. This means that all issues are open for discussions within the committee without preconditions and without making considerations of one issue dependent on the resolution of another. And it also means that issues should be framed and fall under a constitutional heading. The Constitutional Committee is mandated by agreement to prepare and draft the constitutional reform as a contribution to the political settlement. If the Constitutional Committee is to deliver on this, it must focus on its constitutional mandate. Third, the second round only underscores the need for a broader and comprehensive political process. The government and opposition reaffirmed this when they agreed in the terms of reference and core rules of procedures on the need for a broader political process moving forward to build trust and confidence and implement Security Council Resolution 2254. Indeed, I believe that while a Constitutional Committee cannot solve the crisis, it can help foster the trust and confidence between the parties that can open the door to a broader process. And equally, such a broader process can feed positively into the work on the constitutional issues. Madam President, I believe a meaningful, wider political process will be one that delivers tangible actions such as progress on the release of detainees, abductees, and the clarification of the fate of missing persons. It remains a matter of great frustration for me that there has not been meaningful movement on this issue. My deputy and I will continue engaging with the Syrian parties directly, as well as with other relevant actors. We also remain committed to actively contribute to the efforts of the working group that was set up to deal with this issue. In this context, I met with senior officials from Russia, Turkey, and Iran in Nur Sultan last week, and along with discussions on other issues, I stressed the need to move beyond the one-for-one exchanges and to see releases at a meaningful scale of children, women, and the sick. De-escalating violence and a nationwide ceasefire should underpin a wider political process. Northwest Syria has seen deeply troubling escalation of violence in recent days. ASG Müller briefed this council in detail yesterday on the terrible suffering of civilians there. The devastating humanitarian cost of a full-scale military offensive for the 3 million people living in northwest Syria is a price we simply cannot afford to pay. All sides must de-escalate urgently. Civilians also continue to suffer in northeast Syria, where the security situation remains volatile, even if it is calmer relative to the days and weeks after Turkey first launched its intervention. It is crucial that the various ceasefire understandings negotiated between actors there are respected and lead to a sustained de-escalation in violence. The security situation in southern Syria also remains turbulent and should be addressed. Countering Security Council-listed terrorist groups is imperative too, through an approach that is cooperative, that ensures the protection of civilians, respects international humanitarian and human rights law. And as always, while the security situation is the most devastating threat, Syrians also face increasing economic hardship, including as a result of commodity shortages and entrenched poverty. A broader process must ultimately address this too. A broader process should respect and ultimately restore Syria's sovereignty, unity, territorial integrity, and independence. And such a process should achieve a long-lasting, real and genuine reconciliation. Madam President, a broader process must also be inclusive. We continue to consult with the Syrian Women's Advisory Board on the concerns and priorities of diverse Syrian women and their perspectives on the sustainable and inclusive political solution. Syrian civil society should be fully included in any broader process. Ultimately, the process should help develop a safe, calm, and neutral environment, an environment that sees safe, voluntary, and dignified refugee returns to their places of origin or their choosing, an environment in which a new constitution, adopted by popular approval, can be genuinely reflected in institutions and in practice, an environment in which inclusive, free, and fair elections can take place, which include the diaspora, and which are administered under the supervision of the United Nations in line with Resolution 2254. Many of these issues touch upon constitution making, and some could be discussed under a constitutional rubric. But a constitution-making process itself is not likely to resolve them in a way that meets the urgent and legitimate concerns of the Syrian people. I remain convinced that the steps-for-steps model could help unlock practical progress. Steps that build trust and confidence among Syrians and between Syrians and the international community, undertaken in a reciprocal fashion. I continue to press on this in all my engagements with the Syrian parties and international stakeholders. I continue to offer my good offices in this regard, and I continue to support the convening of a new international format to bring together the will of the key players. Madam President, this is my last briefing on my first year as Special Envoy. When I first briefed you, I said my priorities were a sustained dialogue with the Syrian government and opposition, the launch of the Constitutional Committee as a door opener, a wider dialogue with civil society, action on detainees, abductees and missing, and international discussions in support of a political solution. These remain my priorities, but it is time now to update them. The committee is launched, but needs to work expeditiously and continuously, producing results and continued progress. I appreciate my open and direct dialogue with both Syrian parties, but if we are to take it to the next level, we need to address the full array of issues. We must enable de-escalation leading towards a nationwide ceasefire, as well as a cooperative, lawful approach to countering proscribed terrorist groups. As part of this dialogue, we must generate concrete action on detainees, abductees, and missing persons. I think all of this could take shape for the benefit of all Syrians, like through a step-for-steps approach. And I think a key part of this is for international discussions to deepen and for a new international format to take shape to underpin the process. We know that none of this will be easy, and I will continue to count on the full engagement of the Syrian parties and the full support of this Council. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the Special Envoy for his briefing.